Olivia Horgan.
And my name is Michael Wright.
We are students in grade 4.
And we are going to say a special message to Mrs. Patterson on behalf of all the students here at Aldergrove, because Mrs. Patterson is leaving our school to take on principalship of another school.
Mrs. Patterson, we are sad that you are leaving, but we know that teachers and principals go to different schools throughout their careers, and we've been lucky to have you here with us for 6 years.
We know that children and teachers are not the only ones sad to see you go. Parents and community members are too. We know there has been a steady stream of goodbye gifts, cards, and in-person visits from so many who know you who are sad to see you leave.
The reason we are not wanting to say goodbye is because you are a special leader. Students have such a positive connection with you because you took the time to get to know each one of us, and we know you care about the people here at Aldergrove.
Do you know how we know you care so much? It's because you spend time with us. You visit our classrooms every single day. You are out in the halls saying good morning to so many, and outside after school saying goodbye. You are even out during many recesses.
There is a famous quote written by Maya Angelou that we know you have shared with the teachers at many different times throughout the year. The quote is, "They may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel." Well, this is so true when it comes to your relationships here at Aldergrove. We asked students to share some Mrs. Patterson memories, and every single one, yes, every single one was about how you made them feel.
Feeling memories are those we keep in our hearts, and they don't go away. There were so many memories shared with us. It was hard to choose which ones to read aloud, as they were really all very poignant.
We will now read some of them to you and to those gathered here with us today. One student said this: "When I landed in Edmonton, the next day was my first day at Aldergrove. I had jet lag and I felt very nervous. It was Mrs. Patterson who was the first to smile for me and the first to make me feel okay. Because of Mrs. Patterson, I felt that I could do this. In this new school and new country, I have been just fine ever since."
Another child shared this: "Mrs. Patterson showed me around the school on the first day I came. I felt scared, but when I met Mrs. Patterson, I knew I would be okay."
Another student said, "When I first came, there were a lot of people around, and Mrs. Patterson showed me the classroom and made me feel like I wasn't lost in some world. I was where I wanted to be."
Mrs. Patterson cares and comforts children.
A child shared this memory: "Back in kindergarten, when I first went for milk and cookies with Mrs. Patterson and some other children, I was scared to talk. Mrs. Patterson asked me a nice question, and that was the first time I ever talked in a group. It felt very good."
Another student shared this: "My sister told me that Mrs. Patterson helped her out from shyness. As her sister, I can't say she isn't shy anymore."
Another said, "Mrs. Patterson told me to try not to be so shy because then others won't see the best in me."
Mrs. Patterson helps children find their voice.
One student shared this: "When I came to Aldergrove, I felt like I didn't belong and that no one would like me. Then I met Mrs. Patterson and she became my friend. If Mrs. Patterson didn't help me, I wouldn't have had any friends."
Another child shared this: "Mrs. Patterson helps people to get along." Another child said, "When people feel down, Mrs. Patterson comes right away to help them feel better."
A child said, Mrs. Patterson makes us feel good when we get to go right into her office to show her our leadership awards.
Mrs. Patterson helps children feel comfortable in the world of school.
A student said this, Mrs. Patterson makes me feel good when she smiles at me. I like that she gives away smiles. Another child said, Mrs. Patterson finds people to come to the school, like the skipping guy, the Zumba lady, and the Olympic curlers. She gets us new experiences.
A student said, Mrs. Patterson has a nice voice, and she is always happy. One student shared this, I know Miss Patterson will remember my birthday.
Another child said, I like Mrs. Patterson's growling dino slippers. I love her special hats and hairdos too. Mrs. Patterson is funny.
Mrs. Patterson wants each student to be happy.
A child said, Mrs. Patterson knows everyone's name. I don't know how she remembers all those names.
Another student shared this. Mrs. Patterson helps us solve problems so everyone can be friends.
One student said, I feel very good when Mrs. Patterson is around.
Mrs. Patterson cares about every single one of us.
A child said, when Mrs. Patterson comes to our classroom, she says, how's it going? I feel supervised. At my other school, they didn't check on the children that much.
Another student said, Mrs. Patterson is never too busy to answer my questions.
Mrs. Patterson is always everywhere, so I can find her easily.
Mrs. Patterson is a hands-on principal who cares about our safety and our well-being. In closing, to say goodbye to a principal who cares like you do, a principal where every child knows you care because they feel it, is not an easy thing to do.
Our last quote from a student says it all. This school is the school I was meant to be in, and I love it here because of Mrs. Patterson. We love you, Mrs. Patterson. We wish you all the very best. You will be so greatly missed, Mrs. Patterson.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, that's so wonderful. And this truly is a family, and it's an experience that I will never forget. And I will come back to visit, I promise, next Read-In Week to see all the wonderful students and to come back to see the staff and the parents. I want to tell you, this has truly been an amazing 6 years of my life, and I'm so proud to say that I'm doing what I love to do, which is working with children. So thank you all very much. Thank you.